Millions of people seek to have a life of vibrant joy. PhD Joy Bodzioch, appropriate name for an appropriate subject and
exactly.
Life lesson.
That's right.
Did you kind of have to make it a point to live up to your name growing up?
Well, as a matter of fact, I had to find the keys to joy because I really was not joyful for many years. I discovered or actually decided back in the 1970s that God had somehow given my parents the inspiration to name me Joy, so I better figure out how to feel that way. Mm-hmm. And so it actually took me 40 years. I always say that I was kind of like the Israelites. I wandered in my personal desert for 40 years. But one day in 2004, I happened to be reading the Sermon on the Mount and discovered what I think is Jesus' roadmap for finding that inner joy, that peace, that sense of life fulfillment, and it was just amazing. So
that's interesting. So it took quite a while.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just a few short years ago, 5, 6 years ago.
Exactly.
But in the course of time, you obtained a PhD in Doctor of Psychology. Right. How do those two things mesh together? The clinical, the medical, the secular understanding of psychology versus the biblical view.
Well, I think a lot of people would probably say that the two don't mesh very well. Actually, I think that we can borrow from psychology. There's a lot that psychology has to offer as long as we make Scripture the authority. One of the reasons I became a psychologist was because I was looking for the keys to being joyful, and I thought maybe psychology would have those. They didn't. They're just searching like everyone else. But I do think that there are some strategies, some things that psychologists have learned that can be used to help people with various kinds of issues like depression and anxiety. But really, the Bible has all the answers. 2 Peter 1:3 says that His divine power has given us everything we need for life and godliness. And so I always thought, well, gosh, that has to include a sense of joy. But I couldn't find it right away. It took me a long time.
Right. And so you say that Jesus, you believe, was actually the very first psychologist?
Exactly, yeah. Now, I know that's controversial. But, Jesus said He came to bring us life to the full.
Right.
And isn't that what psychologists are supposed to be doing, is to help us to live a better life, to live a life that is full of kind of that fulfillment, that sense of meaning and purpose that we all need.
Kind of like the brass ring, or the gold ring, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Of well-being.
There was a humanistic psychologist by the name of Abraham Maslow that did some research on the characteristics of the person who's in peak form mentally or emotionally. And if you lay them against the fruit of the Spirit, it lines up. And it's interesting because basically what that means is we know what mental health looks like. And Christianity, or Jesus, was telling us 2,000 years ago what it takes to be mentally healthy. Psychology likes to think that they invented all of this or came up with all of this, but actually Jesus had the answer.
Just kind of a discovery of what's already been communicated in the Word. What was your aha moment then when you came to see something in the Beatitudes that I'm sure you had read many times before?
Well, it hit me that there are some versions of the Bible that say, happy are the poor in spirit, happy are those who mourn. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, maybe this was Jesus telling us how to be joyful, how to be happy. And here's something really amazing. When I started writing the book, I decided to go to the dictionary and look up the word joy. And guess what a synonym for joy is?
Happy.
What?
Beatitude.
Really?
Yeah. I couldn't believe it.
I never thought that. I'd have to look that up.
Yeah. So when I was looking for the recipe for, I like to think of it as a treasure map. It's Jesus's treasure map for finding that joy that we all want.
Do you believe that a lot of the psychological things that we experience, or a lot of the poor mental health that we have, do you believe that there is a spiritual root to it?
Oh, yes. Yeah. When I was in private practice, a lot of the folks who came to me were really looking for that sense of meaning and purpose. They were feeling empty. I think a lot of times when we take our eyes off of Jesus, when we follow, the other, quote, gods, that are out there, money, success, all of those things that the world tells us are important, we definitely will struggle with some of those mental health kinds of issues. So I think it's really important that we face the spiritual issues before we go to see a professional psychologist or psychiatrist, although I think that there is a place for that kind of treatment.
Just by way of definition, what does it mean to live a life of joy? How does that kind of look and translate into our everyday living?
I like to think that joy is a synonym for what I call vibrant mental health. It's the kind of mental health that shows on your face. You know, David wrote in Psalm 34 that those who look to God are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. And we remember when Moses came down off of the mountain, his face was glowing. Stephen's face was glowing like an angel after, you know, because of his relationship and his connection with God. And so I think that when we have that vibrant mental health, that inner peace, contentment, spiritual abundance, there are lots of ways to describe it. Those things I think of as joy.
Right. How do you help people that come to you live the Beatitudes out in their life in a practical way?
Well, I think there are a series of steps. One of the things I discovered in researching my book was that the Beatitudes are actually a step-by-step process. They're progressive steps. Yeah, you can't take the third step and skip over the first step. You know, the
so
first
you can't be you know, happy in persecution. And when people
Definitely
insult
not.
you and revile you, unless you kind of
exactly
get to that point.
You got to get there. And I don't know about you, Stephan, but I'm not quite there yet. You know, just because I wrote this book doesn't mean that I've got it all together. You know, I'm still living it and learning on a daily basis. But yeah, Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." That's the first one. So that's the foundation. And it's really about recognizing that our lives are a mess without God. You know, that I need God every single day, because without Him, I can't do anything. I can do things, but I can't do anything of lasting value, you know. And and once you see how insufficient you are without God, then you mourn your ability to please Him on your own power. And those are the first two Beatitudes. Then the third one is the meekness, the submission, the surrender, which is a hard one, especially for us women. You know, nobody likes the word submission. Those are the scriptures we would like to cut out of our Bibles. But, you know, it's a gift to be able to. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'm just going to tell on you here. Got up this morning. There was no hot water in the hotel.
Exactly.
You know, first thing in the morning. How did you deal with that with joy? Because you looked okay when you came in.
Well, I did a lot of praying, let's put it that way. You know, I mean, for me, that's always, the more I pray, the more I just kind of surrender it to God and say, okay, this is yours, God, you just do whatever. And I'm sure that I'm going to feel it by the end of the day. You know, we have our weak human bodies. But, you know, in 2 Corinthians, Jesus says, or Paul writes, you know, that His power is perfected in our weakness. So this is a great opportunity for me to practice that, you know.
Jesus says, my grace is sufficient. And there's a way to face the challenges, isn't there? What is that way?
Well, I think that when we run into challenges, we need to realize that the answers are in the Word. You know, go back, read the Bible, pray, but also have spiritual people in our lives. I think all of those one another scriptures that are in there are so important. When we have spiritual friends who know the Bible, who are able to say, well, you know, here's what works for me, and open up to a passage, and, you know, like the one in Philippians 4 where it says, you know, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything with prayer and petition present your requests. That's the scripture that helps me, you know, whenever I get anxious, before I come on the air like this, you know, have to pray, have to just turn it over to God and let Him work.